especially in the 900s and into the 11th century, and now into the 12th century, and they'll continue to have effects into the 13th and 14th and 15th century. Powerful Roman families were not pleased with this outcome. And Cardinal Pierre Leone called a conclave of his own and had himself elected as an anti-pope the next morning. He took the name Anacletus II. And so for 8 years, there were two men both claiming to be pope. Innocent II, the rightful successor, and Anacletus II, the anti-pope. Now, given that he was from a powerful Roman family, he was more welcome in Rome than Innocent II was. Innocent II had to flee the city of Rome and ended up in southern France to plead his case. And it is here that he encounters one of the most powerful figures of the Middle Ages in terms of the church, in terms of his influence on all aspects of society, and that is Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who, although not the founder of the Cistercian reform, was a member of that first generation, and it was given his influence and his preaching, his example, that helped spread the Cistercian reform of monastic life, which had its origin in 1098. It helped spread from Spain to Scandinavia, hundreds of monasteries within just a century were founded, and thousands of monks and nuns joined this movement of reform and holiness. And St. Bernard of Clairvaux, meeting Innocent II, was convinced that he was, in fact, the rightful successor, and worked tirelessly to end the schism. He also destroyed a budding heresy, converting its leader, and helped preach and launch the Second Crusade, although the Second Crusade did not turn out as St. Bernard had hoped. This is one of the things that will revisit the church again and again throughout the 12th, 13th, 14th, even into the 15th century. The Crusades are much easier to preach and idealize than they are to actually fight, because once you go from the theoretical and the spiritual to putting it into practice, the vices have a way of showing up. And the success of the Crusades don't usually turn out the way their crafters had envisioned. St. Bernard preached on the illegitimacy of Anacletus II. And he said, the election of Anacletus II by his supporters, of which he makes so much, was not an election, but a faction, a mere shadow and an excuse, a cover for his malice. It could be called an election of a sort, but to do so were an impudent lie. The authentic decree of the Church still holds. After one election, there cannot be a second. How can anyone presume to hold a second without first discussing the manner of the former and suppressing it by judgment? And this he sends in a letter to the bishops of the region of France called the Aquitaine. And he writes in a letter to King Henry I of England, "Are you afraid of sinning by obeying Innocent? Just consider for how many other sins you have to answer to God. Leave this one to me, I will answer for it." There will be a great Western schism in the early 1400s, in which the rightful successor of Peter is much more disputed and less clear-cut to many of the rulers. But this urgency to have unity within the church, and this recognition that there can only be one rightful successor, is something that we see repeated throughout the centuries. And the 12th century is no exception. The Second Lateran Council is called in 1139 to put an end to this schism. So on May 29, 1138, Antipope Victor IV, the successor of Anacletus II, and his supporters submitted to Innocent II. Pope Innocent II called a council to meet at the Lateran on April 2nd of the following year. And nearly 1,000 prelates, so bishops, abbots, archbishops, patriarchs, and so forth, gathered for this council. And it had three aims. The council had three aims: to remove the consequences of the current schism, which had lasted for 8 years. And often schisms produce a weakening in discipline, a weakening in obedience and loyalty. They also sought to condemn a heresy that was developing in southern France, who had a notable preacher by the name of Peter Bruys, and to restore discipline within the church. Pope Innocent II opened the first setting stating, "You know that Rome is head of the world, and that from the Roman pontiff all ecclesiastical honors are received, as though by feudal custom, and that without permission they cannot be held lawfully." And then Pope Innocent II proceeded to annul all of the acts of the anti-pope Anacletus II, and that's found in Canon 30. And the guilty parties were required to submit their crozier, their rings, and their pallium. So if it's an archbishop, he would have a pallium. You can see in it, the Pope would invest the newly named archbishops on the feast of St. Peter and Paul with a pallium made out of wool. And this is a sign of authority within their archiepiscopal sees. And then the crozier is the crook-shaped staff which the bishop carries as a sign of a pastor, a shepherd would use to fight off maybe wolves or threats to the flock with that. And then the ring, which is a sign of authority. So any document being sent during that time would often be sealed with wax. And then the ring, which has a shield of the office on it, would be used to seal that wax as this kind of a sign, a stamp of authority. So once the bishop is dead or the pope is dead, that ring is taken away and smashed so that no fraudulent documents can be moved out. The Second Lateran Council also condemned the heresy of Peter Bruys, who had started preaching his heresy in oral France around the year 1120. His errors were rejected by the Council Fathers. So some of the things he taught, and these will be renewed within France throughout the 12th century into the 13th century, leading up to the Fourth Lateran Council. So this is a problem which eventually takes on the name Catharism, the pure ones. The Cathars, the pure ones, are the Albigensians because of their concentration around the southern French city of Albi. Those who, under guise of religion, deny the sacrament of the body and blood of the Lord, infant baptism, priesthood, and other ecclesiastical orders, and lawful matrimony, we expel as heretics from the Church of God, condemn them, and command that they be punished by the secular power. It's Canon 23. King Roger of Sicily was also excommunicated for illegally holding church property and opposing the Pope. The Archbishop Theobald of Canterbury received the pallium at the council, and Sturmius, the founder of the Benedictine Abbey of Fulda, a great and important medieval monastery there in Germany, was canonized at the council. So taking on looking at many different things, and not simply the healing of that schism, but addressing the general needs of the church at the time. The Second Lateran Council renewed the church's condemnation of simony, the buying of office, and it required all those who had purchased their office to surrender those titles, honors, or benefices. So a benefice is a piece of land attached to an office that the office holder is entitled to the profits of that parcel of land. So you think of a field, the office holder would be entitled to the harvest from that field. Chrism, holy oil, and burials were also forbidden to be sold. That, I guess, had to be clarified at this council.